Before we actually ask that can AI really defend us faster, don't you think we should be asking, can AI even see what it is supposed to defend?
Everyone says, oh, it's like a tooling problem. Like, it's not a tooling problem, it's actually a human problem. We lack integrations of our platforms.
I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Yes, attackers can actually operate at machine speed, whereas enterprises have a lot of compliance and governance needs. They are not, so to speak, able to act at a startup pace, whereas attackers can.
Thank you so much, Eric and Aisha, for joining me today in the panel discussion. I'm pretty sure it's going to be very interesting. The topic is interesting and your backgrounds are really, really interesting, suiting the topic. Before we actually go ahead and start having a discussion, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Thank you, Jas, for having me. Yeah, I'm Aisha, and I have a software engineering background. I've been in this industry for a number of years. You'll find my verbiage cryptic because I don't want to give or date myself. So it's been a long time. And currently I'm in cybersecurity domain. I have worked for companies like Apple, have worked for Palo Alto Networks, and the cybersecurity domain is interesting. It's very fast and always something exciting to work on. And these days, it's all about how to secure against AI. So I'm loving it. I lead an engineering team at Zscaler today, and this team builds the experience platform, which is basically a way for our customers to go and set up policies, do administrative tasks, and look into observability or visibility or insights on what's happening on their enterprise and secure themselves. The most important part of my life, which is my family, I have to mention them, otherwise they will be upset. So yeah, I have 3 kids. I have a 14 going on 15, getting into high school, and 11 years old going into 12, becoming a middle schooler. So big milestones. And then I have a 7 years old daughter going into 8. Into 3rd grade. So I live in the Bay Area with my lovely family, and I love hanging out with my kids, my husband, and we love traveling together.
All right. I'm pretty sure you're enjoying the preteen and teen stage of your kids. A wonderful time. Thank you. Thanks, Aisha. Eric.
Okay, so Eric Gaston, thanks for having me. Jas, nice to meet you as well, Aisha. So I live in New Jersey. I'm outside of New York City. I was born here. Actually, I ended up all over the world. I lived in Germany. I lived in New Zealand and Australia and all over. And then I still came back to New Jersey. Somehow that happens. Have 2 children. So I'll start with the family. So I have 2 children. My son, as I said, they're both adults now. So I have a son who's graduated from Boston College last year. He's working in New York. And my daughter is currently at William & Mary. She's going to be a rising junior. So been proud of my kids. Love my kids. We actually have a really, really close family. My wife and I, we are we're empty nesters, and we enjoy a lot of, again, traveling, and especially with work. I traveled a lot last year. So I did over 200,000 miles around the globe last year. And we were fortunate enough that she was able to come with me on a lot of trips. So that was really good. Career-wise, I've been doing this. I guess I'll just date myself. I've been doing technology for a while. So I started my first big role, I guess, running anything was probably about 2005, 2004. So I've started in banking primarily. Ran platform data services at Deutsche Bank. I've ran target state architecture as a CTO at Morgan Stanley. And then I've done and product management. And then I've also been a CTO of a software company, so a large global trade platform called Intra. And that was kind of my time as a practitioner. All of my work as a practitioner is around transformation. Thank you for having me, Jas.
Let's begin. Let's deep dive. But before we actually start having a discussion on AI, part, I would like to start with the foundation's visibility, right? So I would like to read a statement from Microsoft, which was a report named as Digital Defense Report. And that report found that in ransomware cases that reached the ransom stage, over 90% used unmanaged devices, either for the initial access or remote encryption. This statement and this report has really stayed with me because it means the breach often starts where enterprise visibility is zero. So, and my reaction is, before we actually ask that can AI really defend us faster, don't you think we should be asking, can AI even see what it is supposed to defend? Coming to you, Eric, first, from a CIO lens, what's your opinion? I want to understand that how enterprises really operate when they have this level of invisibility.
I mean, yeah, so that is a good question, right? The bottom line is really that, anything to either perform well or to be effective, you have to have the observability or the visibility. If you can't touch it, you can't secure it, you can't manage it. And I think we've been struggling with that for years. And if you look at different industries, advancements make it even harder. So if I take healthcare, medical devices, things that don't have chips, stuff that sits at the edge. The big problem with observability is that most companies were designed sort of from an inside out approach. And if you look at how technology's evolved, technology sort of started in the middle. The problem we're running into now, and the reason why that visibility is becoming more and more difficult to manage, is that our businesses no longer grow at the core. They grow at the edge. And we keep adding devices and adding, so it's bring your own device. And then if you look at, the pandemic, we immediately had to make this pivot and add more, so we added so much weight at the edge. And I think the big problem you have with it is when I talk to CISOs and CIOs, they just go like, look, the table has no edges anymore. And then we started using third-party software. We expanded the number of APIs. You start thinking about this, it just keeps like snowballing. So that 70%, it's not so much the what's in the 70, it's what's in the 30, or even, and even places where they say, oh, we're 95%. It's like the 5% is the tough part, because you can't look at this and say observability, visibility, it's the core for everything. It is the foundation for every single security program. Step one is always get visibility. So I'll stop there. I know that's a lot, but I'd love to pass it on.
I'll come back to you to know some of the scenarios, but then let me go to Aisha and check. Aisha, do you think from the engineering perspective, right, when AI is getting trained on this incomplete telemetry data, what do you think? It fails loudly or quietly? And what matters more to you as an engineering leader?
Thank you, Jas, for that question. I think we all have heard lines like AI is as good as the data. And we all kind of know that when data is incomplete, and then the SLIs or the metrics that we have defined are not good enough, they don't take into account that completeness, then we have assumptions that are not validated or not trustworthy. You can fully trust those assumptions. So these problems then get exposed more because you have incomplete data. You're telling half the story, and then those assumptions that tell that half the story are incorrect. That's like the accelerator. But let's look at what we are already doing wrong, or what are the challenges, which is observability, having completeness of that data. And you are very right, Eric. Sometimes, and most enterprises didn't focus on that completeness because either they that was their blind spot. They were busy like either shipping features, and then I have seen it from the side where the enterprise or cybersecurity company that's focusing on like securing that. So, what I would say is AI security it's not failing because models are weak or the tech is not there. It's mainly because of that quality of the data. And when I say quality of the data, is how complete is it? Are you capturing all the signals? Are your dashboards only showing you the stuff that you put there with assumptions, or are you looking at signals that you didn't consider, or are you challenging all the assumptions? So success is when we start challenging the assumptions. We look at this, and then we also look at the trustworthiness of the data. Like, can we trust it? Security is failing silently because it's failing on the things where we weren't paying attention to unmanaged devices, for example, or like unauthenticated traffic.
Yeah, Aisha, completely agree to it. And Eric, from your lens, I would like to know that what are some of the steps senior leader, CIOs can take to have more visibility in their organization, right?
Sure. So there's a couple things, and I think part of it actually has to do a lot with what you were talking about, Aisha. The first problem you run into is that it's change management, and when I look at engineering, so I run product development, and when you start to do it, you get in this pattern, right, where instrumentation, for example, all the sort of non-functional requirements start going into your product or not. And then it seems like every time you make a release, you kind of contribute to the problems you already have. So you spend the whole month kind of unwinding things and fixing them. And then you get to the end of the month and then you put something into production. So I'd say first thing is, make sure that through your SDLC and your process and your release, like there has to be good governance. You can't squeeze the balloon and develop have a huge development cycle and no testing. Like testing is very important. And if you start to think about the ability of AI to generate unit testing and things like that and regression, it's an incredible advancement. So the first thing I think is really get focused on that pre-production, kind of like the process through SDLC. The other thing is you have to partner with the business. If you're a leader, shadow AI or shadow IT, it's been a problem for years. The big problem you start to run into is, the business has money. They go out and they start to build things sort of behind your back, or when you don't know them, they put them in production, and then you're there with assets. That's where a lot of it comes from. The IT department, we're going to set the guidelines, we're going to provide governance, and we're going to have buy-in from you. But I need business stewardship. The business actually has to understand that they own the data. They own the outcomes. We're here to help deliver that for you. If you don't have that relationship tied together, you're going to end up with a bunch of assets and a bunch of data that has no ownership, and you don't really even know what the business outcome of them are. And that's where you put the most risk, I think, on an organization from visibility.
Yeah. So I think with what you have said, like inventory management, endpoint management, asset management, in all of these areas, we should have tight kind of scrutiny, and whoever is coming in, coming out should be tracked properly to have the 100% visibility.
Absolutely.
Right. And is there any framework or something we can talk about to maintain this? I know this is a very, very broad topic, but on high level, if you think of a framework, open question to both of you.
I just have zero trust, I would hope.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I think I want to add one thing to what Eric was saying. Like, what he's saying is along the lines of making security as first principle when you're building. So from an engineering point of view, from the time that you make a code change and you commit this, there should be security scans running. So your black duck, your check marks, your SAS scans, and like all those scans should be running. And now I think people in engineering domain or leaders should be thinking about how to run AI, scans in like, for example, we've been hearing about, Anthropic and OpenAI launching these new models that are focused on the security domain. So I think those things should be baked in as first step, right? Not later on when it's in production. So that's one thing. And then I think generally from a framework point of view, it's zero trust, and now zero trust with AI, of course. And it's not just now. Whatever we were doing with AI scans before, it just needs to become part of the CI, the continuous integration process when you're building things. So I think one thing with zero trust that I want to say is like, that's the whole point, that you are looking at all the unmanaged endpoints. You're looking at all sorts of traffic, agents, unauthenticated traffic. You're looking at shadow SAS. You're looking at, east-west blind spots. You're paying attention to signals that you might have missed otherwise. And why is that important? Because see, in cybersecurity, you have to have confidence in your approach. And it's expensive if you misplace that by having assumptions about some signals that you ignored them. So yeah, that's kind of, my add-on to what Eric was saying and what you're asking in terms of framework. So security as a principle and zero trust with AI.
So we have talked about visibility. We have talked about the best practices one can take to make sure that things are visible before actually implementing AI, so that they just do not enhance that blind spot and they work on the realistic data. So moving on to another pillar, which is the speed gap. So we have seen the pace with which AI has been accelerated from last couple of years now. And similarly, the attackers, the crime rate has also been increased on the same way, or maybe it is doubled. So I have, again, a very interesting report, and it says that average e-crime breakout time has dropped to 29 minutes now, which was something like 48 minutes. And before that, it was some 62 minutes. Just imagine, within half an hour, any crime can happen. Let's start talking about it, that how we can really, compete with the cybersecurity crimes. And it's not only one industry which is impacted. Eric, Aisha, open for both of you. If attackers are moving twice as fast as 5 years ago, what do you think we should take actions from our side to make sure that our systems are, stable, concrete?
Yeah, I mean, the whole point we're running into right now is that it's almost like great is the enemy of good, and I think what we start to see is the way our systems are arranged. You really have to think about re-architecting and looking at how you're built. So, for example, most security teams were built around tools and teams. So we bought a tool, we have a team, and we have a tool and a team. And and everyone says, "Oh, it's like a tooling problem." Like, it's not a tooling problem; it's actually a human problem. It's we lack integrations of our platforms per se. We fight like latency and error rates and response times and things like that. Like, these are there's performance metrics baked in, but a lot of those are indicative of being attacked. Now, obviously, if you think about how the gangs and how the attackers have changed as well. You talk a lot about ransomware. Ransomware now has moved to cyber extortion. They don't want, you've moved from these sort of government problem we're running into now, and I see this a lot, is like, you can't think of your security posture the way you used to look at it. We used to look at it and ask the questions like, are we protected? Are we doing enough? And then they would throw a tool and a team at that. Now, the question you really need to ask is, what do I look like to an attacker? And what do I look like right now? And that's a very different question. And that requires things like, you cannot protect your systems without real-time data. You cannot protect your systems if you don't know if your security controls are present and effective where they need to be on that edge. That's all that we talked about, right? Where your business is happening, where your third parties are coming in. So that's where the risk lies. The reason why I think it's getting so fast is because business is all happening out at that edge. There's just a lot more places and little spots that people can kind of dig in and grab hold, and then, start to move laterally through your business. So I think, to me, it has a lot to do with that.
Aisha, you want to add on top of what Eric mentioned?
Finding your attack surface is even more important today than before. And that's what Eric was talking about, right? You need to know what is exposed and where you stand today with all this AI accelerated attacks. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Yes, attackers can actually operate at machine speed, whereas enterprises have a lot of compliance and governance needs, and they are not, so to speak, able to act at a startup pace, whereas attackers can. And earlier, maybe they had the luxury, the enterprises, to just be that way, but now not anymore. We are realizing that, the attackers are fast. It's not a hype. It's not like, it is happening in real time, and we're seeing it. Especially, you saw the recent NPM supply chain attacks, and so this is happening, and we cannot be reactive. And by that I mean, like, understand your attack surface
Yeah.
and put programs into place that can address those gaps.
Single pane of glass isn't realistic, but you need to have like one control plane for every type of, say, domain level problem that you're trying to solve. You can't have multiple sources of the truth. So, getting your data and bringing that together and saying like, okay, this is my control plane for dealing with, like specific, just across your domains. You can just look at the different, whether it's identity management. This is my identity management, dashboard and place where we go for those answers. We start looking at like the different spaces. So I think that's extremely important as part of your strategy if you're going to succeed in this one.
I'm just smiling because Eric said single pane of glass is not possible, and that's the very project that I've been working on for 2.5 years.
I love to see it.
It's possible, it's real, and I will show you.
At least consolidate there. That's a win.
Yeah. So, Eric, you mentioned about the strategy. So, in your whole career of decades, have you ever seen the common leadership decision failure which is causing such kind of, breaches? I do not want you to name the organization or anything, but if a small scenario which comes to your mind and you can talk about it.
It's not so much the impact, right? That initial impact happens. You look at the blast radius, you start to think about, okay, how big is it? What they have a hard time controlling is really the dwell time on it. And that creates this tail on the monster. Now, in certain industries, it becomes an issue. So like if you're in financial services, you always have, you got 24 hours in a day, and then the next day you got to start trading again. So if you can't fix it, and as that dwell time expands out and you're trying to, pull in and then reprocess as you're fixing it, it starts to, you're up against time. I think the biggest problem in terms of leadership and common decision is that it has a lot to do with communication. Delaying communication is always a problem, and I think that everyone's trying to be, again, great is the enemy of good. You cannot go for perfection in this one. Like I said, to be honest, if you're 90% there, you might as well be 100, because that last 5 to 10%, from an instrumentation perspective, it's going to cost you a fortune. You're going to spend so much time on it that you're going to ignore the body while you're there worrying about the thumb and the pinky finger.
Great. And Aisha, I would like to know from you, do you feel there is a gap in what has been committed and to deliver in production, but when actually the product comes out, sometimes do you feel frustrated that, okay, now this, I do not want to know exactly in your situation, but have you seen in your organization want to put you in trouble or someone working in this space, that engineering team, they're working hard, but then there is totally a gap between what has to be produced and what actually is being produced as an outcome?
That don't lose sense of the first principle or why we went out to do something in the first place. I see that happening less. And if that's kind of part of the process, that at every level of review, you are saying, did we meet our definition of done that we set out or set in the beginning of when we try to roll out this feature? So I would say, yeah, it happens, but with good kind of SDLC, where you have those success metrics, definition of done with each engineering outcome that you've defined early on. And then you validate that at each, review step before you push things to production, then it happens less. I think in those cases where it happens less, and that, maybe 5% of the times that you didn't do well is if you made assumptions in the beginning of what your customers would need to secure your enterprise, then that would happen. But then I think great companies have a lot of user research, and they're like right there hand in hand with their customers, figuring out whether each step of the way, whether we're building the right thing for them. Yeah. So I think that helps a long way to be more systematic about it.
Yeah. And when we talk about cybersecurity, it's such important portion and heart of any enterprise. And when we use technical points like endpoints, telemetry, identity, detection, response, it is easy to say in technical words than to actually adapt and implement in the organization. So I was also reading about one of the biggest scams happened ever in the US healthcare system. It was in 2024. It was the massive breach, and approximately 192.7 million individuals were impacted by that, and it happened in the healthcare system. So before going to Eric, Aisha, from the engineering side, if you can tell me, when a breach like this happens, right, does that land really differently for someone who has put a lot of efforts in building the platform, protecting those systems?
I think, yeah, of course, because you made some assumptions and now, you didn't achieve the results, right? So I would say that a good engineering team would learn from that. And then they'll relook at their process and say, okay, what can we change? What assumptions need to go out the door? And we need to change our process to that. And I think that's where, what today I'm learning is that we have to look at end to end. For example, you were talking about identity. You can't have a single pane of glass for identity if you have 14 different products that have different way of authenticating and authorizing your customers. So you need a platform approach there. And so I think everything now needs to be looked at from a platform lens and end-to-end coverage. And when I say end-to-end, before you even write a piece of code, you have to think, how will you monitor it in production? How will you ingest those signals? Because now actually AI is writing your code. So once you push it to prod, you need to be observing it. There has to be some sort of trust scoring. How much can you trust it? There has to be, some, and I'm not saying observability that you have 1,000 alerts coming every day, and then now you have alert fatigue and you can't cut the noise. So I think these are the things that we put for the very end traditionally in the past. But after 2020, we realized that we can't. As engineering team, we need to put these like upfront. So I would say that those are the learnings that we should now incorporate into our process, and we have to do it fast. And it's we all know that it's really hard to change a process at scale at a big enterprise. So enterprise needs to start working as small startups within, and the ones that are already doing it have leverage, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's rightly said. And that's a reason even the attacks, these are happening. They are also smart. They are seeing where the enterprises that are having legacy systems, those who are having a lot of disconnects, they are, attacking those systems. So it's very well said that it has to be accelerated fast in terms of, connecting the systems and adopting all of the best practices from the security point of view as soon as possible. Going back to my previous question, Eric, I would like to know more from you. What was your reaction when this attack happened, Change Healthcare? What was the frustration inside you, and what you were thinking that it could have been stopped if we had done, other organizations have done these things?
Yeah, the biggest problem you run into is that everything becomes a bolt-on as part of your strategy, and I think that's where you see the issue. Security was always the fifth bullet or the fourth bullet. It was like, oh, we're going to go do this, and then security. Let's put some security. It's like, and I think what we're starting to see in this process, and you touched upon it, right? So we think about your CI/CD pipeline. We think like if you start to look at how AI is changing the face. If we talk about engineering, it's changing the face of engineering because what it's doing is it's instead of going through this full SDLC where there's like handoff, like, oh, let's all sit in a room and do our go decision now, and like that's over. So let's talk about Change Healthcare. Why is it so difficult to kind of unwind and look at that? Because a lot of healthcare companies, the way they're built, they were built on like huge server farms. They buy a bunch of COTS applications, they bring them in together, and then they start to like do these integrations in the background. Like, okay, so it's like it feels like a black box. It's kind of not, but you can't follow all the different decisions that were made throughout it, so that when a breach happens, like that thing's being held together literally by like, it's pretty brittle. And when it breaks, you see it break like that, right through to execution. It all has to be working together. I think that's, to me, like the big lesson learned from things like this change healthcare. It's like you start looking at this, it's like, wow, we have to really think more, end to end, and we have to incorporate, the security strategy has to be part of this. Now AI is going to be a part of this. So we're starting to like see these things like there's no more bolting on things. You have to actually bake them in.
Yeah, and according to the public reporting for Change Healthcare, attackers entered into the remote access portal that did not have a multi-factor authentication. Nowadays, it is so common to have it, right?
Yeah, you think about that, right, Jas? It's like, how do attackers get in? It's the same way. Passwords, lack of authentication, passwords. It goes back to we talk about, zero trust is a strategy. So trust but verify, or don't trust anything, don't trust anything. Verify everything that's coming through. Yes. I think in that case, when you start looking at it, it's like, this is what you're seeing right now. It's like, even the attackers having new modern capabilities come in, they still come in the same way. They just do it faster and at a higher scale, but they're still doing the same things. We can just do the same things, but just a lot more and a lot faster, right?
Yeah, I think you just hit it on point. I will just add this again, going back to that whole sentiment of, we have to redesign the enterprise is actually this same concept. Earlier, the technical team under CTO and, the IT teams and the business were working toward their own kind of, this is our strategy and we're going to go do it. And afterwards, we're going to think about security or that. So that just has to kind of shift left and become like the first thing up front. I'd say another thing from an engineering point of view, I can see now, like we also have to basically say, no, how you do SDLC, but also your thinking, your mindset. Like, how do you prioritize security or velocity or, so I think security becomes like the next, like velocity, quality, security. And how we balance that and we always keep security at the top, because if we don't, then the other two things really don't matter.
Yeah, but I think it's complicated as well, right? It's not easy, because if we see industries like healthcare where there is legacy of data, they do not have a lot of budget to do, implement things quickly. They have a lot of approval process, a lot of guardrails, a lot of compliances. And like how Eric mentioned, so many third parties integrations, they do not even themselves know that, okay, we are integrated with this to get the data. So it's definitely hard.
If you think about a healthcare company or any large enterprise, their spend profile is like 80% of their spend is on infrastructure and and then you can spend maybe 20% on security, like everything else, right?
Exactly. And that is what my next section I wanted to talk. We have spoken a lot about the visibility gap, but how AI is really going to, impact and improve the systems. Would be happy to discuss. Aisha, would like to know from your viewpoints that what do you think how AI is really impacting? What are some of the crazy developments you are doing, if you're allowed to speak, and how they are really going to, impact the enterprises, those who will be using Zscaler?
I would say so. Some of the interesting things that we are doing with AI, of course, is beat AI with AI. So what can we do to, protect our customers, enterprises, with agentic AI, and, how fast can we, deliver features to them, how we can incorporate AI into SDLC. We are doing things at a record speed now, like things that we did in 6 months before, we can do in a month and a week, 5 weeks or 6 weeks. Things that we did in a month, we're doing in a week. So we are accelerating a lot. We're also investing a lot in validating that whatever we are doing using AI is actually going to be something that we can support with full observability and, stay on top of helping our customers. So these things are kind of baked as first principles as we are adopting AI. I think in a couple of years, landscape's going to change. Nature of the job is going to change. Yeah, I think that's all.
All right. Thank you, Aisha. Eric, what are you seeing some of the innovations happening with AI in this cybersecurity side?
I mean, on the cybersecurity side right now, I think, you're starting to just see, you're starting to see a lot of movement. If I look at like security, security copilot, things like that are in the market. I think the first thing I'll say, there's a lot of security dashboards kind of being created through AI. So that's the first thing, is the visibility side of this. I think the risk there, we'll table the single pane of glass thing, whether we think it's there or not. But the reality of it is, a lot of AI, it's learning as it's going, and I think it doesn't have the domain knowledge. It doesn't have a lot of the tribal knowledge that teams have, especially in healthcare and financials and things like that. So when you look at regulated industries, I think what you're starting to see is, AI will in these mashed up views create false sense of security. It'll say, "Oh, everything's good." And then the biggest mistake is that the people with the tribal domain knowledge will say, "Oh, okay, well, we have full visibility now from AI across these key systems." And then they look at it and they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, but we only have 70% of our assets instrumented. So now we have a bigger problem." So like we've talked about, we started right with this whole idea, like there's fundamentals, visibility, making sure like, do I have everything? If you think that AI is going to make that situation a lot better, it's probably not, because you have to feed it information. It's got to learn. So to train those models, if you're training them with bad data, or to me, that's why I say real-time data. It has to have real-time data, because what you're doing to it is you're starting to give it the ability to have like adaptive controls within it. So no different than I'm changing lanes in my car and the mirror on my thing is lit up. Like, well, I probably don't want to drive now. Now, if I give you data from a week ago, and you're like, well, I guess maybe there's a car there, maybe not. You might take the risk. The other thing too, I think we start to use AI to score things like confidence scoring. I think we have to pressure test that a lot. I think about some of these risk scores and risk trends, right? Producing confidence. Like I'll say, so we think about that asset inventory. Not all assets are the same. Some are higher risk than others. So when you start looking at them and saying, like, is everything instrumented? Like, you're not going to instrument them all the same. You're not going to look at, I'm not going to view certain things, especially when I think about healthcare, because you're really looking at a business continuity problem, right? So the risk involved with this could lead to certain, business, shutdowns, continuity, how you deploy the assets around your patient and patient care. It's not about, the systems shutting off. So I think there's a lot there.
Absolutely. So you mentioned data is a core. Without good data, again, whatever you are building, even AI will not solve your problem, which is very valid, and it's across all the industry, be it healthcare, finance, high tech, or any other. So, Eric, if any CIO is listening to this podcast and has 1 week to take any action, what is the first move that actually reduces risk? What are the recommendations from your side?
I think there's a few things that I would tell them to do, but the first thing is, like, if you're going to do one thing, so become a red team bigot. Go do your 60-minute breakout readiness. Like, do it every week to get your teams going. Like, are we ready? Don't stop looking at this from, the how fast can we react. Start to become proactive. So become a proactive red team bigot would be my first thing. And then the second thing is, and it probably dovetails on that, stop asking questions like, are we safe? Like, that's a terrible question to ask in this day and age. So I say, start asking the outside in questions. see where you stand against that. And then from there, take that outside-in approach. Get to the point where you walk around the floor. Hey, what do we look like to an attacker right now? What is that? That's like, I'm out on the edge now looking back in, right? And it's like, wow, this is what, if you can answer that and you can answer that in real time, you're probably crushing it in your job. So those would be my two pieces.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Eric, for the two awesome piece of advice. Aisha, coming to you, one thing a security engineer leader should do differently starting this coming Monday. We are recording on Friday. So starting Monday, what do you think a security engineer leader should be making things different?
Look at your SDLC end to end. Find the top movers. I already kind of, so I would say this is kind of looking at your system and identifying the things that will break first and then focus on those. And you can use AI to actually do that. Identify at least the common scenarios where you will fail and then, start focusing on those. I think one of the things I'm realizing is engineering usually takes the brunt of everything and doesn't talk to business or the product partners. But it's that time where you have to evangelize why these things that you focused on, like RAS, tech debt, and these things are also important for the business. So that partnership needs to happen, and we all need to kind of work together to prioritize these items that we identify as like key things that may fail in that scenario. So that's my advice. And then one thing that I really started to think when you were asking me this question, I once had an opportunity to do a Wheel of Misfortune with Google. It's, I think, a concept that they have. So I would say every engineering leader should be running a Wheel of Misfortune. And that's what can go wrong. What are your assumptions? If something bad happened today, an incident happened like that, what are the things that will fail? And then start, getting better at making those things work.
Great. Awesome. Thank you for such candid conversation.
This has been a pleasure, Jas. Thank you so much for the opportunity to discuss this.